Madam Speaker.
Return sanity.
Madam Speaker, my friend from San Fernando West is very fortunate that I stand in this house in the holy month of Ramadan. And I may be prohibited to utter certain words that I can't use in this house in this holy period, Madam Speaker.
How decent.
But, Madam Speaker, the member for San Fernando West spoke a lot about desperate arguments in this house. But, Madam Speaker, I saw a man suffering from tabanca.
You could say that.
Heavy tabanca, Madam Speaker. At one point in time, I heard, rightly so, that he's underwriting the law. Madam Speaker, respectfully, that is no longer the job of the member for San Fernando West. There's a new man in charge, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, a fired man shouldn't be giving advice of who want to come for who walk in this side. Study your side, Madam Speaker. And I have to now correct some of the matters on which the member for San Fernando West would have misguided this particular record, Madam Speaker, and it is my duty to now bring some level of sanity, reasonableness, and truth to this particular debate. And, Madam Speaker, during the period 2010 to 2015, the People's Partnership Government, led by the member for Barataria, did not introduce a single new tax. Not a single new tax. In fact, in some instances, taxes were in fact reduced. And that government, Madam Speaker, was able to build hospitals, schools, police stations, roads, bridges, and people had basic necessity of water in this country, Madam Speaker. Water. And this government is now coming to squeeze the taxpayers of whatever little money they have after an unprecedented pandemic, causing many to lose income, many to lose their homes, many to lose their jobs, and want to ask them for whatever little they have now to give to them for waste, squandermania, and I don't want to say the C word.
Oh, no.
And, Madam Speaker, I have to remind them, because this government, the C word is, yes. And, Madam Speaker, they would have spent $500 million.
Your colleague knew better.
John, Madam Speaker.
This is the same government that presided over a $500 million loss in the Atlantic Train 1 scandal.
Yes.
Soca on the Seas, a Prime Minister residence that cost $45 million. And you have swimming pools in this country that is costing the taxpayers $6 million, and not a single person could swim in that pool. Yeah. Madam Speaker, this is the track record of this PNM government. They have no moral authority to come to this population to ask for their money for them to continue their waste and squandermania. And the member for San Fernando West would have raised issues of property tax in the context of local government reform. And I have to put this in context, Madam Speaker. The member for San Fernando West seems to suggest that property tax will go into local government. Madam Speaker, that is not entirely truthful, because there are several categories of land under this particular regime. You have residential lands, you have agricultural lands, you have commercial lands, and you have industrial lands. Only residential properties are going into local government, Madam Speaker. So they want us to believe that the government is going to give all of this property tax to local government, and that simply is not the case. It is not the case. Madam Speaker, then the member made it seem as though with property tax collection, it means that the corporations are going to get more money. Oh. Well, that's not true, because the law says otherwise.
You're not fasting.
When we look at the Miscellaneous Provisions Local Government Reform Act, Madam Speaker, at page 50, where there was an amendment to section 150, and I want to read this into the record. It says this: where estimates have been approved for use of a corporation for a particular year, and the corporation is in receipt of sums collected from property taxes for use by the corporation, the sums shall be offset from releases due to the corporation for that year. So what does that mean, Madam Speaker? That means that if a corporation was getting $10 million from the government, central government, but they collect $2 million in property tax, it would now mean the government will give them $8 million and they retain $2 million in property tax. It's not that they're going to get an additional $2 million. The law says it is an offset. So, Madam Speaker, that is propaganda on which I am not giving way. You spent your time speaking about pink palaces. I am spending my time speaking about the law, Madam Speaker.
Oh, yes.
Madam Speaker, and that is simply what the facts are. The law says it. This was a law brought by the member for San Fernando West, Madam Speaker, that says that property...
Member for... Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so the member has now given us the assurance he'll curb his ways, so I'll ask on the other side that we don't reciprocate what we know we shouldn't do. Member for Barataria, son.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that was a law brought by the member for San Fernando West.
Correct.
That was a law that was brought by him. So, Madam Speaker, then he said, why can't a man get $30,000 a month in salary?
But he gets more.
The answer is, Madam Speaker, because another man wants $80,000 per month in salary.
That is
That is the simple answer to that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to also respond to some of the points made by the Minister of Finance in his piloting of the bill that is before us. This very short bill that is before us that deals with another amendment to the Property Tax Act 2024, Madam Speaker. The bill is 2024. And in this particular provision, Madam Speaker, the member is speaking about history, and history in terms of that the UNC wanted to re-implement or start the collection of taxes through the land and building tax regime. They are two separate regimes, and that featured in this debate, Madam Speaker. And the member for San Fernando West followed on from the Minister of Finance and cried and said, you all did not repeal it, Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker, let me put some more facts onto the record. The People's Partnership Government would have laid a bill in this Parliament called the Land and Building Tax Bill of 2011, Madam Speaker.
Correct.
And at clause 45 of that bill, I am reading and it quotes, the Property Tax Act 2009 is repealed. That was the policy of that government, Madam Speaker. That government did not collect property tax. Property tax was suspended from the period 2009 to present, when this very wicked government now decides to tax the population out of the little monies that they have, Madam Speaker. And that is the point I wish to raise with respect to that particular issue. And Madam Speaker, there are other points that I want to now go on to with respect to specific provisions in this bill. And one deals in particular with objections. Now, there are two separate sets of objections, and there are time limits now being extended through the bill for objections. So let's start. Under the Valuation of Lands Act, that is the bill that sets the base value, the annual rental value for the property, which will be used to calculate what the property tax is. And under that particular law that was amended in 2018, there was the introduction of two layers of appeals. The first layer being, one, the Commissioner of Valuations. So if one person receives a valuation for their property and they're dissatisfied, there are several grounds which they can file objection to the Commissioner of Valuation, saying you want a review of your valuation. And if you're dissatisfied by that, or the Commissioner does not make a decision within 12 months, then you make an appeal to the Valuations Tribunal. So we set on that. We're clear on the procedure under the Valuations of Lands Act. Now, the Minister has, in fact, promulgated a particular order, Madam Speaker, that was published on the 15th of March, 2024. And it says, for the purposes of the Valuations of Land Act, Section 19, a period of 6 months after the service of a notice of valuation is appointed for the filing of an objection to the notice. So let's analyze that. So they extended the period of 6 months after the date of service for you to now file an objection. The original time in the Act was 21 days after you got the notice of valuation. Now, I have in my possession some persons who would have received notices of valuation that they passed to me from December. So, Madam Speaker, December 2023, 6 months later will take us into around June 2023. 24, sorry. This Act now amends the law to say that property tax assessments has to be done by June 2024. So while you give the person 6 months to make an objection, the BIR is going to already process your property tax with the original assessment. So the objection really does not have any meaningful effect, because the assessments would have already been prepared by June 2024, your deadline for filing an objection if you have received your notice in December. What happens to the person who received their notices prior to December, but the 6 months has already elapsed after this March 15th, 2024 notice? Are they going to get that extension? Madam Speaker, and that is a point that we have to understand what this government is doing, because this entire thing is not well thought out. Because when you look at the bill, you will see inconsistencies. If I take you to the Property Tax Act objection system now, this assessment that would be done through the bill by June 2024, if you are dissatisfied with that, you don't go to the Commissioner of Valuations. You go to the Board of Inland Revenue. And if you're dissatisfied with the Board of Inland Revenue, your appeal lies with the Tax Appeal Board, not the Valuation Tribunal. So there are two separate streams, but the two acts are married with each other. So, Madam Speaker, that is a recipe for chaos in this country. In matters of taxation, you try to make this thing as simplistic as possible for the ordinary man to understand, for there to be ordinary access and free access to their rights under due process that is inbuilt within laws. And I want to submit, Madam Speaker, that this law does not afford individuals that particular right because of the lack of clarity and the high levels of complexity when it comes to the objection system. It would mean that any ordinary citizen must be able to go into the BIR, able to fill out a form and lodge their objections. It cannot be that they don't have money to pay property tax but has to hire a lawyer for legal representation to take these matters forward, Madam Speaker. That simply cannot be what is being intended by this particular piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. Now, this is also why I'm saying that this is not well thought out, because the minister also referred to deferrals. And I want to make the point very clear when it comes to deferrals, because the minister makes it seem as though that once you get this deferral, that's the end of it. That's not true, Madam Speaker. According to the form that is before us, this particular form outlines various categories in which persons can seek deferrals. And when you look at the Act in particular, which deals with the deferrals at Section 23 and the amendment that came in 2018, a deferral only lasts for a period of 2 years. So you have to keep renewing this deferral after that 2 year, going back, proving your case. Listen, I can't pay this tax, keep deferring it. And when you kick the can down the road, that property tax is going to accumulate. So whoever becomes the eventual purchaser, inheritor of that property will have to clear that property tax. It is clear that it is not an exemption, it is only a deferral, Madam Speaker. It is a deferral. And going back now with the point on the objection, the Act is very clear, Madam Speaker, when it comes to the deferrals and when it comes to particular provisions with relation to the objection procedure. So one might think that, okay, I file my objection, so therefore once I file my objection, it means that I don't have to pay the tax at the rate that was given to me. Ordinarily, one person would say, well, I don't agree if you assess my property annual rental value as being $200,000 for the year, if I file my objection, it means that I don't have to pay that particular tax, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that is not true. Once you file an objection, it does not operate as a stay. What that means? It means that you still have to pay the tax on that value, and until a final adjudication of that objection, if the tax is reduced, then you will have an adjustment to what you would have paid. But you will have to pay the tax on whatever value that they have set in the notice of valuation and the property tax assessment forms. So while the government comes on the eve of a general election trying to make it seem as though that they are caring in government, that they're giving persons a chance to object, that is not entirely the case. They can object, but they will still have to pay the tax on what was assessed. And that point has to be made clear and driven home, Madam Speaker, that does not prevent you from paying the tax. The tax is here, it is coming, and it is going to hit you very hard, Madam Speaker. Very hard. Madam Speaker, I also want to raise some other points when it comes to the other provisions in the bill that deals with affirmative and negative resolution. In 2018, when the amendment first came with respect to the schedules, which we are currently going to amend, it now allows the minister to amend these schedules by way of negative resolution. So he simply has to say, today the tax is 2%, next year it could be 10%, the following year it could be 15%. I do not have to come back to the Parliament. All he has to do, by the stroke of a pen, he can change the interest rate, the rate for property tax, Madam Speaker. He can change the rate. And what the minister had said in 2018, and this is why we have difficulty in trusting this government, is this, and I quote from the Hansard of the 11th of May 2018, when the Senate was in committee. And the minister is saying this: the important and fundamental schedule that would impact upon people is Schedule 1, which is the rate of interest. Schedule 1 is the rate of tax. And I am proposing an amendment before we deal with yours, he was speaking to Senator Mark, that would make any minister responsible for taxes required to come and debate a change in the rate. So if we are going to change 3% or 1% or 5% or 4% or 5% to 10%, as the case may be, the minister will have to come and amend the schedule by affirmative resolution. So that is very important. So that one is affirmative. What happened, Madam Speaker? It is all of a sudden no longer important to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Why is this government ducking and afraid of accountability, Madam Speaker? Come to the Parliament and justify if you have to adjust the rate of property tax. Why do you want to sit in your ivory tower with a stroke of a pen and tell people what they must pay before you come to the Parliament and justify to the people of Trinidad and Tobago why you want to increase their rate of tax under this particular harsh regime, Madam Speaker? That cannot be right. We live in an accountable democracy, and the minister we are proposing should not escape accountability and must come to the Parliament and justify any rate increase in the future, Madam Speaker. We are not taking that from this government. We are not. And when it comes to discrepancies and anomalies with respect to the property tax, Madam Speaker, a person very close to where I live passed me his notice of assessment in terms of the evaluation. And the facts of it are that he and his wife, elderly couple, they own a particular property, a house. They're joint owners. There's one building, one house on the land, one house. So on the 7th of November, his wife received a notice indicating that the rental value of the house, the annual rental value, is $57,162. Surprisingly, and that had a specific PIN number on it. Surprisingly, on the 23rd of December 2023, another notice was given to him with another PIN number indicating that the annual rental value for the property is now $107,583. And it came on two separate names, two separate PIN numbers, same property, Madam Speaker. And now he got a notice of assessment for the property tax, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this can never, ever be a proper system that is being implemented. And Madam Speaker, I want, for the sake of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to offer a reason why that might be so. Because it all deals with what happens at the valuation division, Madam Speaker. It all deals with what happens at the valuation division. And Madam Speaker, I have some documents in my hand that originated from the Office of the Commissioner of Valuations. So let's start with how they do the assessments. There's a document called Process for Use of Data from the District Revenue Office by the Valuation Division to facilitate the development of the valuation rule. And this was issued on the 11th of August 2020, just in time when they were now trying to populate the new valuation rule so that they could roll out the property tax regime. And they were given a list of instructions here, who are the field assessors, in order to comply with. And Madam Speaker, they are step one that they would have looked for, they'll be assigned to various communities, divisions, and then they will have to schedule field visits. They want 6 field visits per day. But then step 5 is important, and I want to read this. It says that you have to use detailed property addresses provided by the field assessors to locate the property. And there's a note, and this is what the note reads. It says that it is also advisable when field assessors encounter an address that proves difficult to locate due to a lack of house number, lamp pole number, etc., they utilize certain deductive strategies. These could entail, but are not limited to, identifying house numbers or other properties on the street and counting either backward or forward to locate the subject property.
They walk backward down the
Madam
hill.
Speaker, this is the instructions that were given to the field assessors who are going to your home to determine what your annual rental value would be, and that is the reason why we are in this mess today, Madam Speaker.
Walk backward down the hill.
And Madam Speaker, when you eventually walk forward, backward, looking for the house, they now tell you what to do when you find the house.
Yes, that's it.
They said from the curbside / roadside of the property.
Yes.
So this is a curbside valuation now, Madam Speaker.
Yes.
I remember during COVID, we had curbside pickup and deliveries. Now we have your valuation being done curbside. So the first thing you do, you take photos, first priority.
Photo.
Note detailed address when you find it. You take a GPS coordinate. I don't know how they're doing that, if they gave them devices.
Smartphone.
Note location description. Identify the type in terms of construction material.
From outside on the curb.
Identify property use / type from the curb. Note the land details, topography, and shape. Note building details, the number of floors, band, and classification. Note buildings, self-contained units. And here this one. Note construction details, the foundation.
From the curb.
How they're seeing what the foundation looks like from the curb, Madam Speaker. This is an official document issued, Madam Speaker.
Why does the dog rush them?
If possible, beams, columns, and air-conditioned units.
From the curb.
Note roof details, frame covering, and profile. Note ancillary structures, porches, carports, pools, storage area, sheds if possible. Note external wall type and finish. Note windows type and frame. Note the number of bathrooms if possible from the curb.
Yeah.
Note services and sundries, utilities, drainage, access road, and identify external defects and modifications if possible. Madam Speaker, and you're all doing this from the roadside, from the curb. This is why we are in this mess here today, Madam Speaker. This is why we are in this mess. Now, Madam Speaker, I have another internal memo, and this is from Ms. Gary Howell, Acting Commissioner of Valuations, to all valuers / heads of region, dated the 1st of September 2020, processing of work for the valuation rule development. So, Madam Speaker, this is what it's saying. They're trying to populate again the valuation role. Madam Speaker, it says that they were pulling files from the BIR, the Commissioner of State Lands, from PRESD in order to get property details. And then here what it goes on to say. It says it is noteworthy to mention that an attempt was made to have the field assessors, who I just mentioned, enter the data and numerous errors were observed. This is on the valuation roll. Therefore, you are required to pay particular attention to ensure that errors made are in fact corrected. And, Madam Speaker, this was since 2020. They were aware of these errors, Madam Speaker.
They give you RP to do that.
And then I want, again, Madam Speaker, I have another internal memorandum from the Valuation Division. And this now deals with the quality of the persons and the qualifications of the persons who were conducting these assignments. Madam Speaker, this is to the Ministry of Finance Permanent Secretary from the Valuation Assistant 3 Committees, November 12, 2018, complaint in respect of the hiring procedure adopted for the employment of the contract position of Graduate Valuation Surveyor 2, Ministry of Finance Valuation Division. And it quotes, "This letter serves as a complaint into the hiring procedure of Graduate Valuation Surveyor 2 by the Ministry of Finance." A letter of complaint, Madam Speaker, in terms of the hiring process of persons who are in charge of the valuation of properties. This is what it says. The advertisement of Graduate Valuation Surveyor 2, which is attached, indicates in knowledge section that the applicant should possess a Bachelor of Science degree in Estate Surveying or Bachelor of Science degree in Property Valuation and Management, and a successful completion of the final examination of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. I quote, Madam Speaker, "None of the candidates invited to the interview possessed the successful completion of the final examination of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors." None of them.
Repeat that.
None of the candidates invited to interview possessed the successful completion of the final examination of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. This is a fundamental prerequisite at this level given the duties and responsibilities. It is equivalent requirement of senior professional staff at the Valuation Division. All of the applicants should have been disqualified from the interview and the position re-advertised, seeking persons with accredited RICS degree in valuation surveying, Madam Speaker.
Disqualified, is it?
Madam Speaker, it says all of them should have been disqualified. The advertised diploma in general practice in surveying must be differentiated from the diploma in surveying. There were applicants that possessed the latter and were allowed to interview. The technical diploma cannot be used for entry level into the professional class of Graduate Valuation Surveyor 1, neither Graduate Valuation Surveyor 2. Other applicants also possessed undergraduate degrees which were not cognate to the field of valuation surveying. Imagine that, such as land surveying. These degrees are not aligned to the valuation surveying profession, and these candidates ought to have been disqualified in the shortlisting process. And if you think that is bad, Madam Speaker, this is where it gets worse. The interviewing panel was not properly constituted. What? The panel consisted of an HR officer and 2 valuation personnel holding the office of valuer. According to the advertisement, the GVS2 reports to the Assistant Commissioner of Valuations, and the members of the panel should be at least the post of Assistant Commissioner of Valuations or Commissioner of Valuations. Hear what it says. A member of the panel valuer should not be the interviewer for a position that is equivalent or even higher. This implies that the successful GVS2 candidate would have been interviewed by their subordinate staff.
Oh. That's a cardinal.
Member for Barataria, San Juan, you have 2 more minutes left of original time. You are entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your contribution if you wish.
I would so appraise myself of those. So, Madam Speaker, this is why people are complaining incessantly about this property tax. And I think it was incumbent on the opposition today to reveal these facts to the population, Madam Speaker, because we are ever vigilant. And, Madam Speaker, I heard the Minister of Finance across the floor making certain comments. But, Madam Speaker, I want to put it on the record that when, during a budget debate on the 26th of September 2022, the Minister of Finance, I'm quoting him, he says, members of the tribunal have been appointed with a recruitment of the chairman in progress. This is in relation to the valuation tribunal. Madam Speaker, I simply could not trust him. I have a duty to the people of Barataria, San Juan, and that of Trinidad and Tobago. So I had to pen a letter to Her Excellency, and Her Excellency wrote to me, Madam Speaker, by letter dated the 17th of November 2023, when I asked if she has received the advice of the JLSC on the appointment of the chairman of the Valuation Tribunal. Her answer was no. When I asked her if whether the chairman of the Evaluation Tribunal has been appointed and the name of the chairman and the date of the appointment, she says, in light of your answer to question 1, question 2 does not apply. I ask her...
Member. Yeah, so in terms of the letter, I'm just reminding you of Standing Order 48.8 in terms of that letter that you're purporting to use. Okay?
Madam Speaker, I'm just reading this particular correspondence into the record. And Madam Speaker, when I ask about whether Her Excellency has received the advice of the Minister and or the Cabinet on the appointment of the 4 other members of the tribunal, because it's a 5-member tribunal, the response was that the President did receive the advice of Cabinet with respect to the 4 other members of the Evaluation Tribunal, but it was not considered prudent at the time to appoint the 4 other members of the tribunal. What that simply means is that no tribunal was appointed, no tribunal existed. The Minister came in a budget debate and said that the tribunal was in fact appointed. Madam Speaker, we cannot trust this government. We simply cannot trust this government, Madam Speaker. We simply cannot trust this government. Madam Speaker, we are ever vigilant. When I look across the floor, Madam Speaker, it seems as though the government has collapsed on this debate, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, with all of these issues I have identified with respect to the manner in which valuations are done, the persons who are doing the valuation, the process being used, the rate being used, I ask the government, withdraw this bill, bring a new one, repeal the entire Property Tax Act, Madam Speaker. This is something that should not be imposed on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. You are affecting their constitutional right of property, the enjoyment of property. You want to impose an arbitrary, inconsistent tax, Madam Speaker, that is only oppressive and will seek to bring more hardship to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. I call on this government, Madam Speaker, to do the honorable thing, repeal this Property Tax Act, Madam Speaker, and when they pass that act, Madam Speaker, we then ask them to dissolve the Parliament and call the general elections, Madam Speaker. And with these few words, Madam Speaker, I thank you very much.
Minister of Public Utilities.